Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Encourage Mindset. I'm your host, Ethan Vandehyve. This is an episode I've been thrilled about the last couple of weeks. We have an amazing guest in Tyler Webb. He is just a guy that has determination and a passion in the sports world. So super exciting to see. I think we're a little disagreement on sports fans because I'm a huge Packer, Badger sports fan, and I think you're on a different side of that. But why don't you tell the audience about who you are, your journey, and everything about yourself?
Sure. So I'll stop you first. Big Packers fan as well. So
Hey,
we can start off. We can start off on a good foot. I'm from Green Bay originally, so it's sort of hard to be from Green Bay and not be a Packers fan. That's sacrilegious. But that's where I grew up. Yeah, was in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I came to Minneapolis, Minnesota for school. So I'm a Gophers fan, although I grew up rooting for the Badgers, and now I get to play on the fence. And when the Gophers are good, I can root for the Gophers. When the Badgers are good, I can root for the Badgers. It's more of a fan of convenience, really. But I came up here for school, and I thought I wanted to study biology, and so I entered the School of Biology, and I realized that wasn't probably what I doing, because all throughout high school I was really interested in sports, as you say, in social media. And it actually started for me back the sophomore year of my of high school, and was introduced to a guy by the name of Frank Kugel. And Frank has continued to be one of a very good friend of mine, but he was running an account called I Live for Football, which you can tell a 14-year-old named that. And it was one of these Steam pages on Twitter that just reposts highlights and, motivational things about being a high school football player. And as we were high schoolers, and Frank and a couple other guys who eventually came on to help us run the account were also high school football players, it made sense, and the very much in our voice and of our own design. And so he had 10,000 followers at the time. And I remember being introduced to him and thinking, that's so. Now, you're from Green Bay, Wisconsin. It's not the biggest place in the world. And to have this idea that you could reach 10,000 people on the internet because of some brand that you created, like he created the logo, all of the tweets were in his own voice. And so by proxy, it felt like people were, 10,000 people were a fan of Frank, and 10,000 people really listened and cared to what he had to say. And I just thought that to be so powerful. And again, this is in 2014, 2015. So operating on social media like that, it was not as ubiquitous as it is today. I think a lot of kids now will grow up thinking like, of course you could reach that many people. But, to me in 2014, 2015, it wasn't such an easy conclusion to draw that that could be the case. So I started helping Frank, or I offered my help to Frank, probably unsolicited, just because of how cool I thought it was. And I had no skills. I never run an account like that. I just knew I wanted to be involved somehow, and knew that I could probably figure it out as I went. And I certainly did. And we grew that account with a couple others to 150,000 followers or something like that. And we carried that all the way through our freshman year in college, when our account inevitably got banned because the crux of the content of the account was posting repurposed highlight clips that often had copyrighted music in it. And Twitter operated at the time on the 3 strikes and you're out rule. And so one Johnny Manziel highlight clip with a Drake song in the background later, our account was banned. And it was a great wake-up call of the fragility of not owning an audience. That, when you have 150,000 followers, yes, it feels great, and yes, you have the login, but you don't own that audience. You can't take them with you if your account gets banned or if you leave the platform. And we also did not build up the brand equity that anybody would care if we spun up an Instagram account or another Twitter account, because we were just a commodity of a page. We weren't anything that really we weren't a brand that had some strong message to offer that you could connect to. So when that happened, I was certainly distraught, and certainly I didn't know what to do with myself, because that was the thing that I had been building up towards for a while. But at the same time, I felt a bit of relief, because it felt like I Live for Football, at the time, this was again like 2017, 2018, was reaching a point to where it either had to be something, or I just had to stop doing anything with it, because it take a lot of money. Maybe at most we'd make a couple $100 a month, and that was split at the time probably between 4 or 5 people. So you can do the math, and we weren't making bags, and the amount of time I was spending on the account certainly did not warrant how little money I was making. And so there certainly was a sense of relief that when the account got banned, I was like, okay, I can now focus my attention on something that maybe can actually make some money. And that helped sort of luckily guided me in the direction of, I'm doing all this stuff in my free time that's not at all related to biology, which was my major at the time. Maybe I should start listening to or reading the tea leaves on the wall and say, like, I'm not interested in biology outside of school. The things I'm actually interested in outside of school are, things like marketing and, mass communications and copywriting. And those are all things that fit a marketing and entrepreneurship major a lot better than they fit a biology major. So I switched majors my freshman year, went on to graduate from the University of Minnesota and ended up actually right away out of school. COVID, I graduated in the middle of COVID in December of 2020, which was an awful time to get a job, much less get a job in sports. Yeah. And so I had an internship get canceled, which sort of forced my hand to start freelancing. And, through that, I met my business partner, started a sports marketing agency and started creating content for myself, which is a fast forwarding of what happened, but that's the very beginning of it.
Yeah, man, I've been checking it out and I saw your posts of late. You were just in Milwaukee for this crazy all-star theory where you're trying to be cheap and figure it out. You're just very creative and it's cool to see, and you're taking a different approach to it. And I think that's the way with sports marketing and finding your passion is you got to be putting your own unique twist into it. So super cool to see you do that. But no, speaking of what you recently, I thought it was super cool. So your brother's a D1 athlete and you were kind of showcasing, okay, this is what you can post to be on a trend side. But if you're actually going to get high quality value and just all this, relatable content out there, you got to throw, hey, he's a D1 athlete out here. Hey, this is what a D1 athlete does. So cool that you can recognize what to do and you get to obviously test your theories right away. So it's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's like,
but go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
If you don't mind me jumping in, I think,
go ahead.
On social, as you point out, Ethan, it's like you have this immediate feedback loop where you can put something out and right away if it doesn't work, whereas if you're a scientist trying to prove a hypothesis, you maybe have to go through months and months of testing and it might be years before you ever find a resolution to the original thesis that you put out. But on social, as you described, like it's something that you can test and iterate and change around at, a moment's notice, which I think is one of the huge benefits of social.
Yeah. So what kind of got you into sports at a young age? Was it growing up in Green Bay and going to the Packer games and doing all the family fun on the Sundays, or what's kind of your motivation on what got you into sports?
Yeah, growing up a Packers fan, I'm the oldest of three boys. And so sports was sort of the thing that we did in our house. And, we all played sports growing up all the way through high school. And I did not get my youngest brother's genes to be able to continue on to play in college. And even in high school, I was probably I was in terms of general athleticism. And so for me, sports always, held a place of like, not so much fueling a competitive urge, although I did get some of that out of it, but it was a way to build camaraderie and be around people I might not have seen myself be around. So I'll unpack that a little bit. So I was a very anxious kid growing up. And so the thought of being in a bottom of the ninth, 2 strikes, 2 outs moment where I'm at the plate and I have to hit the ball to win the game, that terrified me. I would even go as far as to, if I was up in the inning and it was the end of the game and we were in a situation where we could, win the game in the bottom of the inning, I would game out all of the front of me and what had to happen in order for me to get out or for me to get up. And if I decided that there was no way I could get up in that inning because either we were going to lose because we'd, getting out, or because somebody ahead of me would have already won the game, I felt this burden just lift off my shoulders because I could go out there and look like I'm ready to get up to bat. I could stand on the on deck circle and be like, I'm ready to get up here. But in all reality, I've already decided that the bases are loaded and there's already 2 outs. So either the game's going to end and we're going to lose, or we're going to win because the guy ahead of me is going to score the winning runs. That sort of like an anxiety was something that I never handled well growing up. And so for me, it wasn't like this huge piece of it wasn't like this big competitive drive that got me really interested into sports, but rather it was this idea that I was on a team with a bunch of guys and we might not have been friends when we were walking around the hallway in school, but the fact that we had this cat, maybe we maybe we're the same friend group, maybe these guys would say things I didn't agree with, maybe some guy I thought was like not cool enough or too cool, like it didn't really matter because you were all wearing the same uniform, the same hat, and that meant something. And I think as I grew up, I tried to dig into what that something meant. Like, what does it mean to have a common identity, whether you're playing on a sports team or you're rooting for a sports team, and what can, that provide people, whether it be on a one-to-one basis or this like large societal basis. I think sports provide a really interesting backdrop into like the sociology of the psychology of the human mind, because it's like, it seems now like it's one of the last frontiers where we can all agree on something, and it can be like a connective tissue in our society. And so for that reason, I think it's really important. And I think that thread that I started pulling out at a very young age, like, why does this matter to me? Why does this matter to other people, is really what kept me interested. And now I use sports as a canvas to talk about issues outside of sports. I use that as a way to meet people I wouldn't already meet. I use that as a way to build a career. So it's like, it's always acted as this backdrop to be able to do, things against. And all along the way, I'm entertained because I'm watching sports, which is something that, an entertainment product I already love.
Yeah. So you talked about, the baseball theory of you getting up there potentially to bat with the nerves and whatever happens. Did you have that after you graduated, starting your freelance, and now that you created your company? Do you have some sort of nerves in that where you're like, oh, this might not work or whatever? Like, sure. How does it feel as being an entrepreneur at such a young age and knowing you're doing your passion that you love?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd have these doomsdayical scenarios play out in my head often late at night, where I'm thinking all of our, now I run a sports marketing agency, like all of our clients tomorrow could all come to us and say, we're no longer working with you. And all of a sudden our business goes up in flames. Or, even as a very young company or as a young freelancer, you're pretty heavily leveraged into 3 or 4 clients. And if one of those clients leaves, all of a sudden you lose 25% of your business. And so these scenarios would play out in my head, and I would feel really isolated or feel really siloed in these concerns. And I would think, nobody understands what I'm going through, because a lot of people my age just would go and work at a corporate job and have this sense that, they're much safer and their employment and income is much more consistent. And in some capacity that is true, right? I would say, like, on a broad level, like if you look over 30 years, like maybe it is true that somebody who works at General Mills will earn a more consistent income. Like, there'll be less fluctuations in their income up or down than somebody who is a self-described entrepreneur. But I also had to take a step back, and, this was only done through, talking to professionals and working through it myself, where I realized that, okay, one, like from a really pragmatic standpoint, like I'm not at any more risk of losing my job than somebody who works at a corporation is. And if anything, I might feel more secure. Yeah, right. Because if you're a marketing specialist at General Mills and 2021 or 2020 happens and they have to go through layoffs, you just went from having 100% of your income to 0%. Whereas in a client-based business like I operate in, if I lose a client, okay, maybe I go from 100% to 88% of our revenue for that month, but it's not like 100 to 0. And so it's just this idea, like recognizing that, I've prepared for this. I've done this for a while. There is a body of evidence that can prove that I can prove myself that, hey, this thing's going to work out. This idea, this agency, being right out of school, this is all out. But it's only in like stepping back and analyzing where that fear, that anxiety is coming from, can I really feel like I'm pulling myself out of it and kind of move forward.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a question because we're both kind of around the same age. Do people take you seriously? Do these sports marketing companies think that you know what you're talking about? Do they take you seriously? Like, okay, I seen his TikTok. I seen he has a big following. I see his business. Yeah, I'm going to take him seriously. Or is it like, does it take some convincing? Like, here's my data. Here's metrics. Here's what I can do.
Yeah, that's another great question. I think, candidly, I came up at a really beneficial time into this career. And so I think back now, I would freelance all college, even back in high school, like my senior year before I even came to college, I was freelancing. So then some small business owner in Green Bay, Wisconsin was paying me a couple $100s a month to run his social media accounts. And think back on that now. And I asked myself this question, which is, do I think he was taking me seriously? And I think the answer to that question is he was, to the extent that he even knew what he was talking about. So to unpack that a little bit further, as I grew up through high school and grew an account like I did for football, like that was sort of the first generation of anything like that happening. Like only in 2014, 2015, 2016 did we see the rise of these huge theme pages that were all built on curated content. Like, you think of like Bleacher Report or House of Highlights now, that were all built on highlights of other sports leagues. None of the content was owned, but you could still build an arbitrage and a massive following. And then you could sell ads against that massive following, and you could build some sort of business. And so people came up to understand that attention that could be driven on social media was important. But a lot of people, especially the people I was working with, felt too old or felt too far removed from my generation to think that they could even understand it. And so I would get a lot of outreach from people saying, hey, you're a young person. You have done this before. You clearly know what you're talking about. You're articulate enough to at least convince me that you know what you're talking about. I'm going to trust you and turn over my social to you. Or could you help me with my social media? And I think a combination of those factors being like, I was young, so there was some inherent trust built in because older people felt like they were too far removed from it. I'd already done it before. I was fortunate where early on, before being a social media manager was like really a respected job, there wasn't a 4-year degree I needed to have because nothing like that had existed before. So the only way that you could prove that you were good at the job was just doing it. And I was one of the people that was doing it at the time. And so my resume was pretty much as good as anybody's. It didn't matter how old I was because I'd already grown in, a couple accounts to, 100,000 followers plus. And the last part of it is just having confidence in what you're saying. And I think it goes back to what we were just talking about earlier, Ethan, which is, for a long time, I felt out of place. I felt like everything was just going to blow up in front of me. But then I remember like, hey, dude, for the last 18 months, you've been doing this successfully and you've been making more money every month than you were the month before. So clearly you're trending in the right direction. And there's no reason to have anxiety because it just doesn't help you. There's no reason to fear things that are just hypotheticals and will never, ever happen. And so it was in like feeling that confidence that I could turn around and, express and sell that confidence back to somebody. And when I learned how to do that, I think that was the cherry on top of being able to start like a sustainable business as a freelancer.
For sure. Yeah. So I have my own website design and development company that I created, and I want to hear your story of this too. When you land your first client, you are the happiest and most excited person on the planet. So what was kind of your how did it feel to land your first client? You're starting it. You're like, what was your story? Like, how did it happen? What transpired?
Yeah, I'll tell you the story. So I, at the time, was working at Festival Foods, which I know, Ethan, you're a Midwest guy, so you're familiar with.
Oh, yeah. They have good donuts. They have good donuts.
Yeah, it's a grocery store chain. I was working in the produce department, and the produce department was sort of notorious for being a really easy job because there's a back room that you could go into that had the freezer and the boxes of all the produce where you could basically hide out. So whereas if you're a cashier, you got to be on the floor all the time and you can't really sneak any time on your phone. If you're in the produce department, you could just go into the back room, hide from all the cameras, and you could, be on your phone. And for me, that meant I'm on my phone. I'm like refreshing Twitter to see a tweet that I just put up on I Live for Football to see how it did, or I'm replying to DMs, or I'm doing something like that. So I remember I'm working a shift at night and I look and I get a DM from some football camp on football. And they're like, hey, we'd love your help promoting this camp. We see that you're in football, hopefully you could put a tweet out about it and some football players will sign up for this camp. And I do a little digging into what the camp was. And I realized it was going to be located at St. Norbert College, which is up in De Pere, Wisconsin, right outside of Green Bay. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's funny. All the people that run this account are also from Green Bay, Wisconsin. Like pure happen chance that they even decided to reach out to us because all these pages could be located wherever, right? Like us being located in Green Bay was not a central part of our identity as a page at the time. And so we get to talking because we realize that there might be an activation here more than just us, tweeting about their camp. Like maybe we could come out and we could get content. And for me, this was really, really exciting because we had never done any person thing like this before. And we never had thought about putting on an event. So the idea that there could be a bunch of high school football players that might very well follow us that are going to be at a camp in Green Bay, Wisconsin already. And we could go there and set up a table and give away wristbands and give away t-shirts was like super cool to us. Cause that was the first time the digital would ever have crossed over into the physical. And so we really started working with this camp to make sure that could happen. And we promoted them for a little bit. Then we went out to the camp and we did all those things that I just talked about. And it was really cool because the first time, again, that all of this stuff we were working on in our bedrooms or in the back room of Festival Foods was finally playing out in person. And people would come up to you and be like, I follow your page. I love it. And like, that was the coolest feeling ever. And so the guy who ran this camp, it really does, right? Especially when it's in person. All the comments you seem to filter out, but when one person said in person, it means exponentially more. And so the guy who runs this camp, his name is Tom Wall. He also owns a Packers apparel company where he sets up a tent outside of Lambeau Field on game days, and he sells shirts with, funny sayings on them and cool designs that are sort of like, the alternative of what you could get at the pro shop, which is usually a pretty logo and the Nike swoosh. And so he sees that I have some competence in social media, to our point earlier, and he sees that I'm a young kid and I've already been doing it before, and I'm articulate enough to hold a conversation with him. And he says, "Hey, I need help running social media for my clothing brand. Do you think you could help me?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like that's so cool." Like, he wants to pay me to help him do social, and it's for a Green Bay Packers clothing brand, which is, we talked about at the beginning of the show, I'm a huge Packers fan. And so I said yes, and I'm pretty sure he paid me, $200 a month, which was more money than I had probably ever made on Island for Football up until that point. And so I was, tweeting about him, being outside in a tent at Green Bay Packer games. And it wasn't the most laborious job, and I probably wasn't the best person to run it because I didn't get too creative with it. I had no real skills other than an iPhone that I could snap some pictures with, but it was in that I learned what clients were looking for. I learned how to talk to them, how to storytell around progress you're making on social, what a strategy could look like to sell a product to somebody, because those were pressures that I'd never felt before. And I'm forever grateful to Tom for giving me that first opportunity. And he's somebody that early on was a mentor to me. And it was, as you say, like the coolest feeling to think that I could count on $200 every month for posting on social media. And that $200 at Festival Foods meant I had to be in person for a full day, whereas I could just be in my room, for 15 minutes and tweeting out a picture. That juxtaposition really stuck out to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a super cool story. I saw you did an in-person event and you were one of the speakers. How did that go? And what was a big takeaway from that experience?
Yeah. So back in February, we did an event called Breakaway, which was a sports business event in which we were getting together. The idea was to get together a bunch of sports business professionals in the Minneapolis area. Minneapolis is actually a really cool market for sports tech startups, sports betting companies. Even, we have like 6 major sports teams, including WNBA and an MLS team now. And so there's a lot of attention and energy and personnel and money around sports here, and it's a fantastic sports town. It's certainly a tortured sports town, but it's a real passion for everybody that lives up here. And so to sustain that industry, there's a bunch of these professionals that work in marketing and work in operations and work in sales and work in development. And to our knowledge, and this is on the Uncle Charlie side, which is our sports marketing agency, there wasn't an event that brought all those people together, sort of talk about industry secrets and just like a place for people to get to know each other. And so over a course of 5 or 6 months, we organized this event, which we ended up holding at CHS Field, which is the home of the St. Paul Saints, formerly a very popular independent baseball team, and now the AAA affiliate of the Minnesota Twins. And it was a fantastic space up at their club level. And we had close to 70 people show up, which was awesome. And, we had food served and we had drinks and we had, panels of speakers that were fantastic. And the speakers ranged from, I'm not going to call them old, but they're sort of like an older generation of operations and marketing people that could sort of speak to the hiring and the, brand strategy and of a sports franchise. And then we had a younger panel, which I was moderating, who were comprised of content creators and marketers who could sort of speak to the new direction of sports marketing and sports media and sports content creation. So it was awesome. Honestly, Ethan, the demographic of people that we got to show up was super cool. It was a lot of young people who were interested in working in sports, a lot of students, which I was really encouraged to see. And I think it was really beneficial, especially for those younger people who come and just understand the type of people that work in sports, what their level of commitment is to it, how they're thinking and talking about things, the areas of focus that they're honing their skills in. A lot of people say they want to work in sports and then they just kind of stop the conversation there. And it's like, well, hold on, you can work in marketing, you can work in, operations, sales, supply chain, accounting, like there are finance, there's a bunch of ways you can work in sports. So just saying that you want to work in sports isn't really enough. So I hope that we exposed those younger people to all the different ways that you could truly work in sports. And for the older guard that was showing up, I think they got rejuvenated to know that there's a really impressive young crop of students that are always coming up and ready to help innovate and ready to help take, these properties that we all love to the next level. So it was a fantastic event.
Yeah, no, and that what you said right there relates to anything. If you have a passion for art, like there's multiple ways to get in art. If you have a passion for, science, there's totally different ways you can get into science. So what you said right there nails the head of, finding your passion and building a business around it, which you've obviously done. But before I let you go, what has been like some challenges or obstacles that you've really had to overcome by creating this passion into a business?
Well, I would say the big one that I think on a daily basis is how do I balance where I am right now and where I want to be? And you could talk about that in the context of work-life balance, which I think is an important conversation. But I think that focuses in too granularly on a day-to-day level. And admittedly, it's still a battle that I like, knowing when to log off, and the fact that work in social media means you're never truly off, or you could always at least justify why you have to be on social media at any time of the day, which isn't really a healthy obsession. But I also like to pull back and think about my career from just a directional view. Like, am I doing more things today than I was 6 months ago that I like to do? Or more importantly, am I doing fewer of the things that I don't like to do as compared to 6 months ago? And so, for me, it's like, how do I put that foot in front of the other to make sure I'm getting the things done today that just need to get done? I have obligations as an agency owner and as a content creator now, but how am I also setting myself up in 6, 18, 24 months to be in a position that, I really aspire to be in? I think sometimes we can just get lost in the day-to-day execution and not pull back and think about the bigger picture. And I think that goes from a brand strategy perspective. I think sometimes people are too keen to get a social media post out one day and not ever take the time to pull back and think, what's the direction of my brand here? And also from a career perspective, I think too often we're just stuck in doing the monotonous day-to-day work, and we don't think about the steps that we could be taking now to, change the trajectory of our career 1% at a time. And so those are some of the things that I think about, and I make sure I allot time every day for the future thinking stuff and more of the time to the stuff that needs to get done that day. But it's always a balance that I honestly still struggle to find.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And that's good that you're hot about it. You're honest about it. You're open about it. And most importantly, you're very transparent. So that's super cool. Any final, this is where I love to walk away with the podcast. Any motivational, quote or message that you want to share to the audience today?
I think the biggest thing I will say, especially in my industry, is there are fewer gatekeepers than ever that are preventing you from doing what you want to do. And so I'll speak specifically to sports and to content creation or to marketing. If you wanted to be a prominent figure in sports media or sports business 20 years ago, you would have to go to an accredited and expensive 4-year university, probably Northwestern or Syracuse, to get some sort of sports journalism degree. And then you'd have to work your way up through local news and then regional networks. And then maybe one day when you're 45, 50 years old, you'd be lucky enough to be the 1% of the 1% of the people who get to work at ESPN or Fox Sports or CBS. And today that's not true. You can reach just as many people, if not more. I would argue that I probably reach more people than some of these shows on ESPN do, because I can post freely on a open and democratized platform. And now all that's standing between you and your ability to do that is your own inhibitions and your motivation to get started. And so I just want people to step back and think, I know it feels harder than ever today to get a job or to get a job in the area that you want, but I also want you to think about how there are fewer obstacles for you to do the things that you want to do, especially when you pull into perspective 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so make sure that is a feeling that sits inside of you. And it doesn't have to be at the front of your mind every single day, but make sure you remind yourself of that every once in a while and think, okay, what steps am I doing? Understanding that there are fewer gatekeepers than ever to get to where I want to go. And if there's a destination I have in mind, and I know that I have to get through certain gatekeepers, because there's always going to be people that are going to stand in the way or prevent you from getting to where you want to go. Is there a second path that you can, circumvent them and do it yourself? So just a helpful reminder for people who might be needing it.
That's awesome. And then final takeaway question. This I just love this because you started out this young. People are mostly going to be like, wow, that's crazy. He's doing that. Wow, go him. What has been one of your most thankful moments that you really appreciated that has happened to you?
That's a really good question. I think I have to think back to some of my very first clients. And they were not only people that paid me to do social media work for them, but they were also older guys, two in particular, Tom Wall and another guy by the name of Paul Miller, who represented another handful of my clients. And they acted as mentors for me. And I don't even know if they always realized they were doing it, because they would hire me and I would pitch them on hiring me and they would agree to it. And then they would push me to continue to do more. You know, it was like they always wanted to push their own brands forward or their own projects forward, of course. And that's always the push and pull of a freelancer and a client relationship. But there were many times where I would come to them and say, hey, listen, I just don't know how to do that. I've just never done that before. And they would say, whatever you can do for me is better than I could get anyway. So why don't you just go and figure it out? And they gave me the license to fail. And they gave me the ability to go do something, not do it very well. And I still felt supported and like I wasn't going to lose my job. Because as I say, when you have two clients and if you lose one of them, all of a sudden you're out 50% of your income. And so that fear to do something that's not going to turn out well can sit really deeply inside of you. And you might not want to try things you've never done before because you're going to get fired if it turns out poorly. But those two guys specifically gave me the freedom to do things poorly and to try new things and to test and iterate without the fear that I was going to be dropped because they didn't like the way it turned out. And so I'm forever thankful for that. And that's, you know, a feeling that now sits inside of me a little bit stronger, where I feel comfortable going to a client and saying, hey, we need to try this. And it might turn out badly, but if we don't take this swing, we're not going to get to the end point or the goals that we've set together. And so it's almost flipped for me. Now I feel like I'm the one pushing, our clients forward today in the same way that I felt pushed very early on in my career.
That's the best passion advice you can give for somebody that wants to start a business for their passion right there. That was awesome. So once again, Tyler, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you for, being your honest, true self and talking about a thing that you are incredibly determined and passionate for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan.